Before the Mafia, before the Commission, before the infamous 5 families ran New York, there was fear, and it had a name. In the cramped tenements of Little Italy, where laundry lines crisscrossed overhead and street vendors barked in Neapolitan dialects, the air in the early 1900s was thick with more than coal smoke and ambition. It carried something darker, a low hum of dread, growing louder each time a shopkeeper found a letter under his door, paper thin, but heavy with menace. Signed in looping ink, marked by a crude image, a dagger, a skull, a bleeding heart. The name scrawled at the bottom struck terror. La Mano Nera. The Black Hand. It wasn't yet a mafia in the modern sense. There were no crime families, no councils, no ceremony. This was raw street extortion, a crude but effective weapon wielded by men who'd brought their fearsome reputations with them across the Atlantic. Italy may have exiled them. America had no idea what was coming. In tenement buildings and above corner storefronts, the Black Hand's reach extended like a vine through the immigrant community. Its victims were not Wall Street tycoons or city elites. They were butchers, barbers, bakers, men who had fled poverty and violence in Sicily or Naples, only to find it follow them in the shadows. A man would open his shop one morning and find a letter, a demand for money. Pay, or your child loses an ear. Pay, or your store goes up in smoke. Pay, or they find you in a barrel. Sometimes, the threats weren't empty. A butcher's horse might be found dead in the street. A child wouldn't come home from school. A bakery window would explode in a burst of flame and shattered glass. The message was always the same: pay. And one man knew how to turn this chaos into capital. Giuseppe Morello. Known as the Clutch Hand due to a deformed right arm twisted by childhood disease, Morello was a Sicilian exile who had already spilled blood before he set foot in America. He had fled the violence of the Fasci Siciliani uprising and brought with him not just scars, but tactics. He landed in Louisiana first, like many Italians at the time, before moving to New York. By the dawn of the 20th century, he was already a name whispered with reverence and fear. Operating from a base in East Harlem, Morello ran what could best be described as an underground empire, a network of extortionists, counterfeiters, smugglers, and killers. He understood power and terror intimately. More importantly, he knew how to organize it. Where most Black Hand operators were thugs with ink and bravado, Morello brought structure, discipline, and strategy. He began issuing orders not as requests, but as law. The infamous barrel murders became his calling card. In April 1903, a man's body was found stuffed in a barrel on East 11th Street. Dismembered, mutilated, unidentifiable. The message was clear. This was not random. This was enforcement. The press ran wild. Headlines screamed of a new terror in the city, something foreign and unstoppable. Some papers blamed the entire Italian community. Others invented wild tales of secret brotherhoods and blood rights. But underneath the hysteria was something real, something organized. Morello wasn't acting alone. His men included his half-brothers, his cousins, his countrymen. And he had a right-hand man who would soon be more feared than he was. Ignazio Lupo. Known as Lupo the Wolf, Ignazio was colder, more violent, and arguably more ambitious. A former grocer with a legendary temper and a rumored body count, Lupo specialized in enforcement. When letters failed, Lupo made house calls. He was said to leave no witnesses. His legend grew quickly, aided by stories of gold buried in the Bronx, of clandestine meetings in candlelit cellars, and of corpses dumped in sugar sacks along the East River. Together, Morello and Lupo were building more than a racket. They were laying the blueprint for what would become the American Mafia. Their operations extended into counterfeiting, creating thousands in fake currency, so well crafted it fooled major banks. They rigged contracts, fixed prices, and used threats to control Italian-owned businesses from the Bronx to Brooklyn. But even as the Black Hand men terrorized their own, a new enemy emerged, one who understood them from the inside. Joe Petrosino. He was short, stout, and bull-headed, the kind of man who walked like he was charging through a fight, even when the street was empty. An Italian-American, Petrosino had grown up in the same neighborhoods as the men he hunted. He knew the language, the customs, the codes, and he hated what men like Morello had done to the community he loved. Petrosino's campaign against the Black Hand was methodical. He arrested letter writers, cracked extortion plots, and infiltrated social clubs that doubled as crime hubs. He didn't just investigate, he built webs, surveillance, informants. He worked from dusk till dawn, mapping out the shadow lines of a city beneath the city. He convinced the NYPD to let him create a special Italian squad, focused entirely on rooting out criminal elements in immigrant neighborhoods. For a time, it worked. Arrests followed. So did headlines. Petrosino was called the Italian Sherlock Holmes, but fame made him a target. By 1908, he had intercepted a letter threatening to kill him. He laughed it off, but the threats kept coming. In 1909, Petrosino's war went international. He traveled to Sicily under a fake name to gather intelligence. His mission: compile a list of known criminals who might emigrate to America and continue their operations. It was a bold move. It was also a fatal one. On March 12, 1909, in a Palermo piazza, Petrosino was gunned down. 4 shots. No suspects. No arrests. The streets of New York erupted. His funeral drew tens of thousands. An immigrant cop had taken on a transatlantic criminal syndicate and lost. Still, something had shifted. Morello and Lupo's fortunes would begin to unravel. In 1910, both were arrested on counterfeiting charges. Their conviction marked the beginning of the end for the old Black Hand dominance. But the scars they left on people, on neighborhoods, on law enforcement ran deep. The Black Hand was dying, not because its methods had failed, but because someone had figured out how to do it better. A new breed of gangster was coming, more polished, more ambitious, less prone to spectacle. The 1920s brought prohibition, money, power, and a new generation. The old ways, letters and empty threats, were replaced by bribes, bootlegging, and bullets. The Mafia wasn't born out of thin air. It evolved, from whispers to organizations, from crude threats to silent dominion. But the Black Hand left its mark. It taught young criminals how to strike fear, how to demand silence, how to rule from the shadows. And in those shadows, a boy named Luciano was watching. In the next episode, we head to Brooklyn, where meat hooks hang heavy and ambition cuts sharper than any blade. We'll step behind the butcher's counter and into the violent rise of Frankie Yale, the man who brought style, swagger, and a deadly new order to the streets. Before Capone made headlines, Yale was carving out a kingdom of his own.